All right, we're going to get started here. Thank you for joining us on the webinar today, and for those here in person. My name is Heather Donnell. I'm the Director of Education and Advocacy here at Community Support Network. I'm also joined with Jonathan Ruthier, the Executive Director of CSNI. And we are honored to have Chuck Saia, the Executive Director from the Governor's Commission on Disability, and Bill Dwyer, the New Hampshire State Treasurer, here with us today as well. They are going to give a high-level overview of the new Stable New Hampshire accounts brought into the state of New Hampshire. This is from the federal legislation relative to the Achieving a Better Life Experience Act, which is also known as the ABLE Act, that was signed into law in 2014. Just a couple of things ahead of time. To ask questions, you can use the Q&A, the question and answer session, the box, and type them to us. Jonathan and I will be monitoring those questions, and we hope to be able to answer all of them. Bill and Chuck will do their presentation, and we will hold the questions until the end. And if for some reason we are not able to answer the question, we'll follow up via email for that. And also after the webinar, I will send out a link for the registrants to do a survey. We would appreciate any feedback that you have with that. And from there, we'll send it over to Chuck and Bill. Thank you.
Okay, well, Jonathan and Heather, this is Chuck Saia. I thank both of you, and Bill and I thank CSNI, and we thank all of the participants on the phone today in order to get the message out about Stable NH. You know, from the perspective of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA was passed in 1990, truly heralded as a monumental piece of federal legislation that was a game changer. In 2014, when ABLE was signed into law, it had the same effect. I mean, this truly is a game changer for people with disabilities. When we look at the previous rules that individuals had to grapple with, it kept people with disabilities impoverished and subsequently unable to invest. And we consistently heard terms such as, I can't have more than X amount in the bank. I have to spend down. This is going to affect my federally based benefits. That's all changed. And that's what Stable NH is all about. And as Heather had stated, 2014, ABLE came into being at the federal level, and in 2016, New Hampshire rolled out RSA 195K, which is essentially the enabling legislation which allows New Hampshire to operate its own ABLE savings program. And New Hampshire's in a great position. We're probably, and I'll defer to Bill, I think it's roughly, we're just shy of about 30 states in the nation, I think.
Correct. I think we were about the 24th or 25th state to roll out an ABLE savings program.
So what we truly are, in true New Hampshire fashion, ahead of the bell curve. So again, you know, I thank for the opportunity. As Heather said, we have two PowerPoint presentations. We have an abbreviated one, and then we have a longer version. What we have found, we are tending to operate with the abbreviated version. We have the full PowerPoint on the Governor's Commission on Disabilities website. I believe it's on Treasury's website, as well as StableNH.com, that anyone can always look at the PowerPoint. So with that, I think Bill and I, you know, again, my co-administrator is Bill Dwyer, the New Hampshire State Treasurer. It truly has been a privilege working with Bill, and he and I are truly tied at the hip, as they say, to get the message out. So I'll turn it over to Bill.
Thank you, Chuck. And again, I'd like to thank Jonathan and Heather for hosting us today, and thank all of you certainly for for joining us in the webinar. And we hope to cover a lot of content. We've had an opportunity to look at a few questions ahead of time, and I think we'll address a lot of questions, and then at the end, if there are any that we haven't covered, we'll have an opportunity to respond to those as well. But turning to slide 2, which is what I'm about to do. Oh, I think I have to maybe just click on it. There we go. Thanks, Chuck.
Yep.
As Chuck talked about earlier, one of the true goals of the ABLE account, and again, when instead of saying ABLE, I'm just going to keep saying Stable NH, because that truly is the New Hampshire brand and the New Hampshire product. But the benefit is not only to provide financial independence, but really to make available the types of tax advantages that are also available with conventional 529 savings accounts. So the section of the Internal Revenue Code, not to get too technical, that authorized college savings accounts was Section 529. The section of the Revenue Code that authorized ABLE savings accounts is Section 529A, and it was deliberately set up that way to mirror a lot of the characteristics of college savings accounts. And so that's what gives rise to a lot of the tax advantages of owning a stable NH account. As the slide notes, the account is owned by the individual with the disability. So the individual with that qualifying disability must be the account owner. The account is held in their name. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but the account certainly can be opened by someone who's either the parent or guardian of the individual with the disability, or it can be opened by someone who has the power of attorney on behalf of the individual with disability, but the account itself is in the name of that individual. And as we talked about a little bit before, there are a lot of benefits, and the intent of the product is to allow those who qualify to be able to save and not simply sort of pass through very quickly as soon as they receive benefits, spend them down quickly, but really over time to be able to accumulate savings by virtue of the investment features of this account. There are 5 different types of portfolios, and we'll get into those later, that have different allocations of bonds versus equity. And then there's also an individual portfolio that consists of an FDIC insured product, so it has the sort of same FDIC protections as you would see in a conventional account. But you know, the stable account does offer a lot of different options in terms of the different investment allocations. And on top of that, those who open the accounts can shift different balances or proportions of their total holdings across the different allocations. So there really is the absolute amount of flexibility associated with the account. As I talked about earlier, as long as the earnings that are generated through these different investment options, as long as those earnings are used on qualified disability expenditures, and we'll talk about that later, the earnings themselves are tax-free. And so that is, again, the way in which this investment product is designed to mirror what we see with conventional college savings plans. So with that, I will hand it back to Chuck.
For folks that have joined in after our introduction, you are on the Stable NH webinar, and just as a reminder, if folks have questions throughout the presentation, we're asking that you submit those through the Zoom application. Just move your mouse and hover over the bottom part of your screen. You'll see a button that says Q&A. If you click on that, you can submit a question, and we'll try to get to all of those after the formal presentation.
Well, moving on to the next slide, essentially, who can have a stable NH account? Prior to get into the meat of this slide, StableNH.com is going to be your portal for opening up a stable account. By all means, you can visit nh.gov/disability, which is the Governor's Commission on Disabilities website. You can also visit nh.gov/treasury and visit the state treasury's website, but you will then ultimately get redirected to StableNH.com.
Actually, I'll jump in.
Go right ahead.
You can actually just go to nh.gov.
And nh.gov.
Without going to either the Treasury or the Governor Commission on Disability website. We discovered recently, and Chuck found this, that across the top banner, we're looking at the top of the page at nh.gov, you'll see the Stable NH logo right there embedded in the top banner. And then if you scroll down at nh.gov on the left-hand side, you'll also see the Stable NH logo. So you don't even have to go to the GTD or the Treasury website, but we'd happy to have you go to the Treasury website and also look at our bond documents if that's the kind of thing you're interested in reading.
So again, StableNH.com, that will be the portal. So again, we're going to speak a little bit about a special needs trust later in the program, and some of you may already have a special needs trust, or you may have at least some exposure to it. But again, when you go on StableNH.com, there's a very simple eligibility quiz, and it truly is, as you answer one question either way, yes or no, it takes you to the next question. You will find, and I have spoken to parents who have opened up accounts, the entire process, and that this may seem like a lot, but it takes about 19 minutes to actually get up and running to open an account on StableNH.com. So once you make it through the eligibility quiz, there are some ground rules. There is a limit of 1 account per person. So if you were to have had an account that was opened up in another state, you would have to make a decision because you can only have 1 account at StableNH.com. Another requirement is that the individuals with it has to have a disability that occurred prior to age 26. And this means that the disability had to have begun before age 26. You don't have to have been formally diagnosed before age 26. You also do not have to open the account before age 26. For example, you could have had someone who developed a mental illness at 25, was not diagnosed until 30, and did not open their stable account until age 35. So again, the onset of the disability has to be by age 26. And many people ask, why age 26? Well, again, this is when we have to look at the intent of the federal legislation. When they were putting this bill together, there's obviously, as we know in state government, there's fiscal considerations and fiscal notes. Well, at the federal level, they also had that same concern. So they picked age 26, and it was an age that was set to keep the cost of the bill in terms of lost tax revenue low and below a $2 billion mark. So that's how they arrived at age 26. And then there was also some discussion that they wanted to keep it somewhat similar to the Affordable Care Act as far as dependent. So that is, so again, the individual with a disability has to have had the onset by age 26. You must be a New Hampshire resident to have a StableNH.com account. In addition, you must also meet one of 3 criteria. And these are not all required. It's one or the other. So you have to have been eligible to receive SSI, which is Supplemental Security Income, or SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance, due to a disability, or you can have a condition that's listed on the Social Security Administration's list of compassionate allowance conditions, or you can self-certify. So again, when we look at the intent of the legislation, the intent is not to be draconian. It's not to knock people out from having an account. It's actually just the opposite. They're providing different paths so that you are eligible to open up an account. And if you don't receive SSI or SSDI benefits, or you don't need them, I should say, to be eligible for an for a stable account. You can still self-certify that you have a disability. So again, when we look at the different options that are available, it's very liberal in the interpretation as to who can have a stable account. So now I'll turn over to Bill.
We'll continue on to talk about the different criteria and limitations in terms of funding the account. The annual account contribution limit is $15,000, and for those who can deposit $15,000 a year for 33.8 years, they'll reach the lifetime limit of $462,000 of total lifetime contributions. But in terms of talking about the annual limit, the earnings in the account, let's just say hypothetically someone deposited $15,000 in one fell swoop and then did not make any expenditures, so that by December 31st, or the interest will get credit as it's earned, but let's just say by the end of the year, the balance in the account has reached, say, $17,000. It's okay to go above $15,000 with your earnings. It's just the amount of contributions that are limited at $15,000 in a calendar year. In terms of actually who can deposit funds into a StableNH account, it's anyone. It's the friends, the family members of the individual who owns the account. There's no limit on the particular relationship of the people who want to contribute to a StableNH account. And as long as the aggregate amount, again, of contributions in a single year doesn't exceed $15,000, someone might have 15 different friends and relatives who each want to contribute $1,000, and you can get to the limit that way. And as you can see, there are some nice features on the website. There's an opportunity at certain events and milestones during the year to create what's called an e-gift event, and sort of to send out a reminder to friends and families about a birthday or a different event, anniversary such that may be coming up, that the individual would like to, instead of receiving particular gifts, they may just want to have contributions sent into their stable NH account. I can tell you this is not unusual too, because I see the same thing in the college savings side, where we see people able to request, rather than receiving gifts, that grandparents are asked to donate into the college savings account. So there's no need to be shy about this particular feature in the account. You can certainly use the features on the website to send out those reminders to friends and families. And in a similar way, the system keeps track of those contributions, who sends them in, and will send out automated thank you notes and replies. I'm trying to see if there's anything else we wanted to cover on this slide. Again, you don't need to keep track of your own contributions, as long as the account limit is set at $15,000. There's no danger of anyone going over that limit. If extra funds were sent in, the program and all the record keeping done sort of behind the curtain, so to speak, will allow for excess contributions to be returned to the source. So if someone sent in a single check for $20,000, the system would actually return $5,000 automatically, and it won't make it possible for any individual contribution to push the limit over $15,000. That's all I have on this particular slide.
Wonderful. You know, and I just wanted to go back to the slide that I had spoken about regarding the age of determination. Although this isn't etched in stone as of yet, there is much conversation in Washington as we speak that the age of onset of the disability be raised to, I think now they're talking mid-40s, 45. So it wouldn't surprise Bill and I that if we see a change within the year and a half as to that actually, you know, being expanded. And I know that'll open up doors for many individuals.
So while we're on that question, a question was posed from one of our participants today, saying that they became disabled at the age of 26. Does that mean they're not eligible because it didn't occur prior to the age of 26?
You know, that's a very good question. And I would suggest the interpretation with the onset has to be by age 26.
Exactly. I'm thinking of the example of a traumatic brain injury.
Right.
You know, that's a specific finite event that occurred that resulted in a disability at a specific point in time. So with certain types of disabilities, it's very clear cut as to whether the onset was before or after age 26. So that's why the example we referred to talked about mental health issues and how those can be diagnosed as having occurred prior to age 26. So the prior to age 26 cutoff really is sort of a hard and fast rule. But again, with certain disabilities, the onset of that disability can be documented to have occurred prior to age 26.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, by all means. Okay, so looking at the next slide, and this is probably one of the more vibrant slides. How can you spend stable funds? Well, withdrawals from your stable account must be used on qualified disability expenses. And essentially, that's anything that, number one, relates to your disability, and two, helps to maintain or improve your health, independence, or quality of life. It's a very broad range of qualified expenses. It can be used for your housing, your rent, your basic living expenses, medical, financial, legal bills, education, transportation, assistive technology. So again, when we look at the intent of the enabling federal legislation, it truly was to give that broad spending power, so long as it was related to the disability. And that's how Bill and I have interpreted what can the account be used for. They're used for qualified disability expenses that relate to the disability and help maintain or improve health, independence, or quality of life. And again, ultimately, Stable NH, Bill Dwyer, Chuck Saia, we're not going to perform an audit of your account as to whether or not what the individual spent the money on, whether or not that's a qualified disability expense. However, and this is a huge however, the IRS can perform that audit. But again, I don't think it's necessary to look at it as if the IRS is suspect of what people are spending their expenses on. I think it's very similar to when we get ready to file our tax returns. At the end of the day, if an individual says, I gave, use just an arbitrary figure, $5,000 in charitable expenses, or I used X amount of dollars in education and related to my work, the requirement or the onus, the burden is on the taxpayer to keep that supporting documentation. And that's exactly how it's going to work with Stable. You don't have to turn your receipts into Stable NH or myself or the State Treasurer, Bill Dwyer. However, ultimately, you do have to keep track of where you're spending your money in. And I hate using this term, if the IRS were to come knocking, ultimately, it's the taxpayer, it's the account holder that has to confirm how they spent the money. The many questions, and I know we had a question specifically in this roundtable regarding what they can be used for. Many questions revolve around, I'm going on vacation and I'd like to take my personal care attendant with me. Is that a qualified disability expense? I would suggest, and again, not that I'm giving any type of advice and I'm not providing a disclaimer here, I think a well-reasoned argument could be made that that is a qualified disability expense for a PCA to go on vacation with a person with a disability. So again, we're looking at that broad range of qualified expenses here. And again, when we look at special needs trust, you don't have that broad range in special needs trust. You're not going to be able to pay your rent out of a special needs trust, but you are going to be able to do it with a stable account. Perhaps you can use your special needs trust to fund your stable account. That's another option that's out there. So again, I think when people first heard of stable accounts, there was understandably there was a reaction, do I need a special needs trust any longer? Or how can this be better than a special needs trust? Well, it's really not better, it's not worse. They're really complementary. And we're seeing that attorneys that practice in that field of elder law and disability related law, they're seeing the power as to how they can work cohesively together. Yeah. Go right ahead, my friend.
The stable card, this is another terrific feature of having a stable NH account. The stable card is actually for the spenders, and it can be used any card that MasterCard is, anywhere that MasterCard is accepted. You can see the MasterCard logo there in the image on the screen. The card is free for all account holders to have. It can be requested online at the time of enrollment, and it's very easy to use. It's worth noting that the card itself does not pull funds from the account. It's not like a debit card that's tied to your checking account. It's a reloadable card. So essentially, the account owner can go online, transfer a fixed amount of funds from the account, and quote unquote load that balance or load those funds onto the stable card. And at that point, it allows them to go out with the card and spend up to the amount that has been loaded onto the card. One of the great benefits of this is that if, for example, the card were to be lost somehow, whoever might try to fraudulently use the card would not be able to access every penny that's in the stable account. The maximum exposure would simply be the amount that was loaded onto the account. And so when the account is, when the card is loaded with, say, $100, and in the course of a week, $100 is spent down, at that point, you can log into your account and reload the card again, with the amount that you want to make available for in-person expenditures using the stable card. You cannot mingle other funds from other accounts that you have into the stable NH or the stable account card, but really just loading funds from your own stable account onto it for expenditures. The one way in which the stable card is not like other point of sale cards is that you can use it solely for expenditures, but not to get cash back in a particular transaction. If someone were to go to CVS or a pharmacy or a department store, it can only be used actually as a true debit card using the funds that have been loaded onto it. So again, the key with that is that it's a repeatable convenience is what I would call it, that allows the account owner to be able to go out and not have to try to walk around with cash, but to actually use a debit card that is limited solely to the amount that's been loaded on it. The other primary benefit of using the Stable card for expenditures is that the Stable program will provide an itemized record of the expenditures that have been made from the card. So that's a great way to have a record and be able to document that the expenditures from the card were indeed used for qualified disability expenditures. You don't, in that instance, you're not going to need to keep receipts and file papers away for the risk of a potential IRS audit. You're going to actually have account statements generated by the Stable card that will document what the expenditures, where they were made and what they were used for. And so it provides protections, but it also provides an added layer of record keeping that relieves the account owner of having to do that extra measure of record keeping. As you can see there are text alerts to alert the account owner or the card carrier that the limit or the amount that's been loaded onto the card is close to being depleted, the balance is low. Let's see. And again, the card cannot be overdrawn because it's loaded with a preset amount that doesn't allow it to be spent down beyond. It's not a credit card. It really is a debit card that is loaded with a preset amount. Okay. That is all on that slide. Did I miss anything?
No, you know what I wanted to add on that, Bill, from the disability perspective, parents and guardians wanted to give their children financial independence, and that's what the Stable card does. Because where it's loadable, they can actually put a finite amount on there. And it's a nice feature that the individual with the disability can now use that card to his or her liking. But it's also a nice protection, because as we know, the population is a vulnerable population. So Stable is being aware of that. When they put together this type of a debit card, a loadable debit card, they understood the possibility that there are unscrupulous individuals that are out there that could try to either steal the card or have access to the card. So where it's loadable, it's really limited as to how much you can put on that card. Now, ultimately, you can put the full $15,000 on there. However, if that's not what you're looking to do, you can put an amount on there that you find, or as the parent or guardian believes is commensurate with the person. There's also a couple other red flags. It's not going to be accepted at a gambling establishment, which is nice. And there's a term that they use known as adult entertainment establishment. So that's automatically going to kick it and say, hold on, we just can't. Allow this card there. And if I'm not mistaken, Bill, and you may have addressed this, I don't think that there's any cash advances or cash allowances.
Correct. Yeah, you cannot use it at a department store and ask for $40 cash back. You just have to use it to purchase the items that you accumulated at the store.
So again, when we, and I know we haven't discussed this, Stable NH, Bill and I, as co-administrators of the program, partnered with the state of Ohio. Because in reading our enabling statute, there were certain limitations that we had. One of them, and the one that was front and center, is that there are no general funds used to administer this program, which essentially means the state of New Hampshire is not given any administration fees to this program. So when Bill, and I do credit my co-administrator, Bill Dwyer, when he vetted out the various programs that were across the country, the program that was in Ohio really fit the bill, and this was one of them. The Stable card was one of them. Their dedication to the community with disabilities was another. An on-staff person who I believe, and again, I could be wrong, but I think he may have come from an area agency in Ohio for umpteen years, and for lack of a better term, he was poached by the state treasurer of Ohio to come on board. So, when we were looking at what program made the best sense, Stable Ohio did fit the bill for us. So Bill, I'm going to let you handle the next slide because I know it's right within your wheelhouse.
Absolutely. and actually, I'll pick up with the right-hand portion of the slide first because Chuck just touched on it. When we looked at the national landscape last summer for the different types of what we call multi-state ABLE platforms. In other words, there were certain ABLE programs that had been established in one state that were open to any other state sponsor to join. And so we looked at that landscape, and one of the first things that jumped out to me, and as Chuck said, it sort of fit with the New Hampshire spirit of doing things as economically as possible, was that the account fees, the asset-based fees, at between 0.19% and 0.34%, depending on which investment allocation the individual chooses, those were absolutely at the time, and I believe I'm confident they still are, the lowest asset-based fees of any program that exists in the country today. So to put real numbers into that particular concept, if depending on how someone has allocated their funds in their stable NH account, if let's just say the account earned 5% over the course of a year, well, if at a maximum, let's just say they invested in the funds that are charged at the highest level of asset fees at 0.34%. If they earned 5% and their investment account fee was 0.34%, then they earned 4.64% net of fees in their account. On the left-hand side there, you can see that there are monthly maintenance fees charged at $350 per month. That adds up to $42 annually. It's a monthly charge that's charged against the balance. We do anticipate that over time, as more and more stable accounts are opened, as more and more states, we believe, join the stable platform, we anticipate that there'll be some economies and that those monthly maintenance fees will come down. But we can tell you today that actually the $350 that's being charged for a stable NH account is already lower than what someone in any state who simply goes on their own to the Ohio platform to join or to open a stable account in the state of Ohio. Those fees are higher for individuals who do it on their own. If New Hampshire residents open a stable NH account, they're going to be charged lower monthly maintenance fees than if they had gone independently to Ohio to open their own stable account. That's all I have on that.
Okay, very good. So we'll go on to the next slide. So now, obviously, there is a lot of talk regarding a stable NH account and a special needs trust. And again, I go back to what I had originally said. They really are complementary tools. They shouldn't be looked at as exclusive. They shouldn't be looked at as I can only have one and not the other. But again, from my perspective, and I guess I am prejudiced, I do believe that the stable NH account is much more easier to work with. When you look at a special needs trust, and for those of you who are familiar with this, in the eyes of the law, the special needs trust is its own entity. It is its own being. It's the trust that is that is created, and you'll have a trustee that has a fiduciary obligation to act in the best interest of the trust and to ensure that the mandates of the trust are met, and also for the benefit of the beneficiary. With a special needs trust, you may have your own taxpayer ID number. You're going to have to file your own tax return every year, and most importantly, you're going to have an accounting. Now, in some instances, this isn't in all instances, that accounting sometimes even has to get filed with the court, depending upon the special needs trust, or if there has been any actions before a court of law regarding the special needs trust. You're not going to have that with a stable account. As I said earlier, within 19 minutes, you can go online at stablenh.com and open an account. It's cost effective. I mean, and again, there's no disrespect to attorneys whatsoever. But you're not going to pay any legal fees to open up a stable NH account, whereas you do have to do that with a special needs trust. You're definitely going to have the broad spending power. You're not going to have those limitations that you're going to see in the special needs trust. And it's very easy account access, as Bill has indicated. I mean, you're opening up your account online, you're loading, the debit card online. Your individuals, friends, grandparents, parents are gifting to their children, right through the portal. And what I think is an incredible benefit is that the account is established, administered, and owned by the individual with the disability. And again, many of you probably know this. even though the law was passed in 2014, there was a long history here at the federal level. I easily probably went back to 2004. And essentially, as the story has been recounted to me, and I'm sure many of you on the line already know it, there were a group of family members in the early 2000s that sat around the kitchen table and said, government needs to do its job. Essentially, we have these college savings plans in which we can set money aside and so that our children can go to college. We need something for individuals with disability. So again, when we look at the intent of what ABLE is all about, that's why we have the broad spending power. We want the easy account access. And again, we're still looking for direction from Social Security Administration, but all indications is again, they're not looking to disqualify you from having a stable account. They're not looking to disqualify you from spending it on a qualified disability expense. It's quite the antithesis, because when you understand what the mission was for these individuals when they put the ABLE accounts, the accounts together, it truly was to make it a lot easier than special needs trusts.
And this is Bill again. I'm just going to chime in. We were aware that there were a couple of questions that had been asked previously, and we didn't get to address them. So I think in the interest of first come, first serve, we'll address those questions, and then we can field the ones that Jonathan has accumulated since then. But there was one that came in that said, when the money does come out, is that tax-free? And the answer is, as long as the funds that were taken out are spent on qualified disability expenses, as Chuck described earlier. So to the extent they're not, and I'll give an example because this does get a little technical. Whatever the earned portion, the earnings that are generated by a stable account, if a portion of what is spent constitutes part of the earnings in the account, then that portion, the earnings portion, would be taxed at both an ordinary income rate as well as a 10% federal income tax penalty. So let me give you an example. If someone had a goal of accumulating $10,000 to purchase some type of assistive technology, if they deposit $9,000 into their account, and during the course of the year, there are $1,000 of earnings, so that the account reaches that $10,000 goal, and if the person all of a sudden decides they wanted to use the $10,000, but now they don't want to use it on assistive technology and they want to use it for some other purpose, then if they take the $10,000 out, the $1,000 that represents the earnings in the account is now going to be subject to both ordinary income tax as well as that 10% tax penalty. And again, these aren't the mandates of the state of New Hampshire. This is federal government IRS guidelines that establish these penalties. So that really is the limit of the excess taxation, both from an ordinary income standpoint and the 10% penalty standpoint, really would be limited to the earnings that are withdrawn if those funds are not used for qualified disability expenses. There was another question that came in asking that any savers who had opened ABLE accounts on other state platforms, whether they should immediately jump to a stable NH account. With my own biased viewpoint, I will say yes, that makes sense. I think you should do that, number one. The primary benefit of opening a stable account is that, number one, you can be assured that there is governance from the director of the Governor's Commission on Disability as well as the state treasurer. Chuck and I have absolutely no authority, no discretion, and no reach, if you will, into an ABLE account that was opened on another state platform. And one of the primary benefits that we looked at when we considered the Ohio program is that it gave each of the states that partnered into that platform the opportunity to participate in an advisory commission where constituent feedback could be shared, ideas for maybe different types of enhancements to stable accounts could be shared with the Ohio State Treasury. So one of the benefits you'll get as a New Hampshire resident with having a stable account is that number one, you're opening an account that has the New Hampshire branding on it. It is New Hampshire's ABLE Savings Program. But number two, you can share feedback and you know that Chuck and I are really on the front lines in terms of sharing our communication and really your communication with the folks who are actually administering and operating the stable program in Ohio. So, and as I mentioned earlier, when we did look at those account balance fees, we did identify that the fees on the stable investments did indeed represent the lowest account management fees that we saw at that time. And I don't believe any other state has rolled out a program since that time that offers lower account management fees. The last question I'll address, and I'll give it back to Chuck after that, is someone asked about different types of investment options. There are 5 different types of allocations someone can choose, and I mentioned the FDIC insured product that really offers that FDIC insurance protection, but it's going to have a lower interest rate because it's going to be similar to a bank offered savings account or checking account. So you trade off FDIC insurance for having a lower rate of return. The other 4 types of investment allocations consist of a blend of equities, which are stocks, and fixed income, which are bonds. And really the 4 buckets consist of different blends of those types of assets. And so the first bucket, I would call it, is a blend of 80% stock, 20% bond. The second bucket is 60% stock, 40% bond. The third bucket is 40% stock, 60% bond. And then lastly, the fourth bucket is going to be 20% stock, 80% bond. And so depending on what your risk appetite is in terms of your investment selections, you've got a range of options between stocks and bonds. As we know, particularly in the last couple of weeks, stocks tend to be much more volatile than bonds. We can see some, price fluctuations with bonds as well. But for those who are more conservative and don't want to take the risk of the volatility of stocks, you might want to choose the bucket that consists of 80% bond allocation, only a 20% stock allocation. So I wanted to make sure I addressed that question too before we dove into any of the other questions that.
And we have several that people have submitted online.
Oh,
Thank you all on the line for your questions, and I'm just going to start rapid firing.
Okay. Yeah.
So there are a couple of questions related to people's SSI and SSDI benefits. So, so one question is, can a person use a portion of their SSI or SSDI to contribute to the account? So can they use funds that they're receiving through SSI to put money aside into their stable account?
I'm just wondering why someone would
Yeah,
want to.
I'm wondering the same thing. I'm trying to understand why you would do that. It's a novel question. I think it's it's hard to explain. I mean, stable accounts, and I say this openly, they're asset shields, but they're not income shields. So when we look at, and again, just thinking out loud, if someone's receiving that money, it's already out there. It's already been determined.
It's already been pre-qualified to be used
Right.
on disability expenditure. So if someone were to take a $2,000 SSDI benefit, or SSI benefit,
right.
$2,000 SSI benefit, and deposit that immediately into their stable NH account, well, right out of the gate, you've lowered the amount of other funds that you could deposit into a stable account from 15,000, and now you can only contribute another 13,000. So those benefits, federal benefits that someone is receiving, are in addition to the amount that could be deposited into a stable account. So from my perspective, it wouldn't make sense to sort of whittle down the amount that you could otherwise deposit into a stable account by bringing in SSI or SSDI benefits to put into that account.
I would agree with that, Bill. I mean, we can definitely look into it and get back to Jonathan with a definitive answer on that. But that, like I said, for our purpose, I think that's a novel question based upon the presentations that we've done to date.
Yeah, we haven't heard that one before, but as I thought of it, I just thought, in effect, you'd be sort of limiting the maximum benefit of owning a stable account if you were to do that.
Great. The next question is whether or not Social Security Administration has approved the spending of the ABLE accounts for rent and food.
Well, it would seem to me that would fall as a qualified disability expense.
Housing is definitely.
Housing's definitely in there,
Right.
and the other list would definitely. What was the other one? I know it was housing and food. I would definitely say that that's related. So yeah.
Food is definitely a quality of life.
I would think so. Yeah.
Okay, super. A follow-up relative to people's benefits. So there's a question on if an individual has housing assistance, do they have to spend toward public benefits? Housing, would be one example, but if you are putting money into your account, is there any requirement to spend at least a portion of it, or some percentage of it toward particular expense items, such as housing?
So if I understand it correctly, so in other words, you have X amount of dollars in the stable account. Do you have to spend so much on housing, so much on food, so much on education, so much on medical? Not that I'm aware of, and I would defer to you, Bill.
No,
No.
not at all.
Okay, great. Okay, so two other questions related. Well, there's another question here relating to housing. So would withdrawing funds affect any housing benefits?
Well, withdrawing funds, if they're not used for qualified disability expenses, would affect other federal benefits. They'll be counted as resources.
Correct.
In terms of qualifying for other federal benefits. If that's the question that was being asked, I think that's what I interpreted. Yeah.
And are gifts or contributions made by other people to an individual's account taxable? So
no.
So if I gave Chuck $1,000 for his account, does he have to include that as income when he does his taxes?
No, again, as long as when he takes the $1,000 out, he's using it for a qualified disability expenses. One of the benefits of a stable account is that if someone else is depositing into a stable account owned by someone else, the $1,000 that the person is putting in is already after-tax dollars.
Right.
That's going into the stable account. So the person who has the $1,000 to give, they've already paid their federal income tax on it. So now that it's gone into the stable account, as long as those funds are used for qualified disability expenses, then there's no penalty to be paid, or if they were taken out by the account owner and spent on qualified disability expenses, that's it. That's the extent of any taxation, so to speak, that would occur with respect to those monies.
Because those are after, so for the donor, the person who is given the money, it's exactly what Bill said. Those are after-tax dollars. That is not similar to some sort of pension or deferred compensation plan, which is pre-tax dollars. So the gift that's coming, say, from a grandmother to a child, the grandmother has already paid the tax on that money, right into the stable.
Following up with that, I'm wondering if the question is also asking, similar to if somebody were to donate to a nonprofit, if somebody is donating this $1,000 into this account, can they write that off?
Oh, you mean like as a deduction?
I'm wondering if that may be what this question.
Again, we have to be careful not to give legal advice or tax advice, but what I would say to that is that there are gifting limitations, and I would think any contributions to someone else's stable account would be subject to the sort of the gifting taxation benefits. That's why the limit was set at $15,000, is because in 2018, in calendar year 2018, the limit on the exemption for gifting was increased from $14,000 to $15,000. So again, individuals who want to contribute to someone else's stable account should ultimately consult with their own financial advisor or tax advisor. But I believe that sort of the gift allowances in the tax code are what comes into play at that point.
Right, I would agree with that. Yeah.
So we have a question regarding 529 account, education savings accounts, and the question is, I have a 529 account for my son. He's not going to be attending college. Can those funds be converted to a stable account in a manner that won't incur tax penalties?
I can say right now that Congress is looking at legislation to allow rollovers from 529 accounts into ABLE accounts.
529A.
Yeah, to 529A. The only thing I'm uncertain, and we'll have to look that up and get the answer, but with the Tax Reform Act that was passed late last year, there was a lot of back and forth in the different versions before it was finalized, and so I've actually got to go back and look up whether that rollover, that tax-free rollover option already exists. So we need to look that up. And again, someone could certainly Google but we'll try to get the answer on that.
Right.
But if it hasn't been implemented already, that rollover allowance, it is being discussed presently in Congress. I think it may very well be in place.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's in place. I know we received an alert on that last month.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. So I wrote it down, so Jonathan and Heather will get back to you on that one.
Great. And one of our participants has suggested that we mention that there are tax supporters available through the CAP offices. So for the Community Action Program offices.
That's wonderful. That's good to know. So which might be another venue for presentation. Exactly. We're always looking for that. So I thank that caller for that information.
Great. I think our last question here is for individuals who are living in an enhanced family care home, and for your benefit, that is the equivalent of an adult foster care situation. So somebody's living in another family's home for support. Are they eligible for the SSI increase if they have a stable account? So we have an individual who's transferred from a group home setting to an enhanced family care setting, was ineligible for the increased SSI benefit due to having a special needs trust. Is this the same for a stable account?
I don't believe so.
I would say no, but I'd like to get back to you on that one also. Yeah. Could you just repeat the question?
Sure. And actually, I'll have a record of it here. So
okay. Yeah. But I agree with Bill.
The overarching purpose of the able accounts in general, but stable accounts, is that they're not going to be counted as assets for any federal disability benefits. So
needs-based benefits.
Right.
So it would seem to be federal benefits. So. Okay.
Good. And then the one more question just came in. How do you set up a beneficiary to the account?
Great question. You can't. There are no beneficiaries on stable accounts. So with that, it is the individual with the disability that actually owns the account. It can be opened up, as Bill had said earlier in the program, by other individuals. That does leave another concern. So what happens when a person who has a stable account, and let's say that person dies? That will follow the laws of the state. So if you have a will, if the person with a disability has a will, the will dictate, the terms of where it goes. If the person dies without a will, then what we refer to in the law as the laws of intestacy, dying without a will come into place. So that there is no automatic transfer of the monies to another beneficiary.
Just a clarified question for one of the ones I sent you ahead of time. I'm not sure if I shared enough information about it. One specific family was setting up an account for this and got to the question of putting in their child's bank information at that time. And that's where they stopped, because they didn't know if the individual with a disability needed to have a bank account prior to setting this up, or if that was a question that could somehow be skipped over, but it looked as though it wasn't able to.
So I'm wondering if they were asking that question as a vehicle to get the money into the account.
Right. Yeah, it may be in terms of, and again, we weren't with them at the time they were trying to open the account, but it may have said as one means to make an initial deposit into your stable account, is there a particular bank account you'd like to transfer funds from? That may have been the question they came across. I would say, if there's a child that a parent is opening a stable NH account for, most children, let's say, a 4-year-old with Down syndrome, they're not going to have their own bank account. So having a bank account on the part of the account owner is not a requisite to opening a stable account. In that particular instance, someone may have come across a question that said, would you like to transfer funds from your own bank account to provide the initial deposit into a stable account? And if they got hung up there, they can certainly proceed. And if they're willing to, or if that's their one of their avenues for depositing the initial money into the stable account is to transfer from their own bank account, that's where they will provide the account number.
That's right. We do have, do you have any more questions, Jonathan?
No.
Oh, okay. We do have the final slide, or a couple slides, if I may. Obviously, there's the 800 number, and that is manned, during conventional business hours. And I will tell you, if you call the number, you will get a live voice, and that's critical. I will tell you also, Bill and I welcome any calls from any participant, any account holder. We will do the best we can to answer directly. If you call the 800 number, you will be redirected to the state of Ohio, but the individuals that are answering are well-versed in the New Hampshire platform. And truly, in order to get this message out, we ask you to follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook. That would be the NH Governors Commission on Disability. If there's any timely events or anything that's changing, we're definitely updating it on a regular basis. Lastly, and Bill did a great job of explaining it, but Stable NH is New Hampshire's program. You know, I can't stress that enough. At the end of the day, if there are problems with the account or if the person has any questions, Stable NH is the program that the state of New Hampshire, the governor and council has approved, and Bill and I are administering. Now, that doesn't, we do get questions. Can I open up an account in the state of Virginia? You absolutely can. Again, you can only have that one stable account. However, if you were to open an account in Virginia or any other state that it's open to, Massachusetts, if you have an issue, you can't call me on the Virginia plan. You can't call me on the Massachusetts plan because I cannot talk to it and Bill can't talk to it. But if you are having issues with your account, rest assured, Bill and I are going to pick up the phone. We have an incredible relationship with the state of Ohio, and we will get the answers that you need. We haven't had any problems, I will tell you, which is great news, and which again speaks to who Ohio is for running this program. But again, really, Stable NH is New Hampshire's plan. That is the one that has the so-called good housekeeping seal of approval on it.
Wonderful. We've had a question come in. If this PowerPoint would be available to send out, could we save this as a PDF and send it out to the participants of the webinar?
You're more than welcome to use this. We have a more robust one also.
Wonderful.
Which is housed on
the GCD website.
It's on the GCD website. Okay, so it's on the GCD website. So if you go to nh.gov/disability, and the right hand, I think it's quick links. I think it says Stable NH PowerPoint.
I'll send that direct link out via email as well, so that people, I do recommend people check out the Governor's Commission website because they do have a lot more resources there, as well as the State Treasury on this. I will send out a few follow-up emails over the next couple of days. One will have the survey, which I will send out probably today, and we would appreciate any feedback on that. And I'll send out more information that has these direct links to this shorter abbreviated version, as well as the more in-depth one. And I do know that there's a frequently asked questions on there that kind of goes into a little bit more detail. So I'll be happy to send an email out following this with more resources on that.
Wonderful.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, Bill and Chuck, it was really just a great pleasure having you guys here. I think hopefully our audience feels a lot more informed and educated about Stable New Hampshire. And, you know, just to recap, we covered, you know, generally what the program is about, what the eligibility criteria are, what kinds of expenses can be paid for out of the account, the use of the debit card, and also the types of investments that are available, packages of investments that are available for folks. And for all of our participants of today's webinar, we want to thank you for logging in, for sending your questions in. I think we've gotten to pretty much all of them, but we are at the end of our hour. And for any that are not answered yet, or folks have additional questions afterwards, we'll be working with Bill and Chuck to get those responses to you via email. So again, thanks everybody for being on today's webinar, and thank you again to our guests for presenting the information.
By all means, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, Jonathan, Heather, thank you. And for everyone on the line, Bill and I welcome. If you have any ideas as for presentations, or if you know of anyone in the community that would benefit from our presentation, we're more than happy. We're hitting the road on a regular basis, so this is wonderful. And thank you, Jonathan, Heather, for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay.
And from over there.